The quick version is Dad was born in Brawley at Pioneer Hospital. They moved here when he was a toddler, and they built a house on 2nd Street, which my dad lived in his whole life until he married my mom. And then when he married, and they graduated here, and so they were married, had us 3 girls, and we moved to a few different houses here in Julian until he built the house on Old Queen-Macker Road. And we have been in that house the whole time and haven't moved since then. And he passed away in that house. So Dad never left Julian, except he loved to travel and he loved hobbies. So the one thing that he always told me was his favorite thing of all things was hunting. And he hunted. But he hunted with my grandpa, and it was the old days. And he would say that my grandpa would say, "Hey, Fred, go get Buster. We need to go for a drive." Well, Buster was his gun. So they would go out, and that was what we ate because we didn't have a lot of money. And so he said most of his lunches were bean and bread sandwiches. And hence beans have been in the family, and we always do big pots of beans all the time. But he quit hunting when my grandpa passed away. And the last one he really hunted with was our son, Logan. He helped him. And so that was a pretty cool, memory. So with that, something you may not know about my dad. So we'll see if you know some of these. So I found he had courses and lots of hobbies. He did fly fishing. He played the dobro, and he bought me a banjo so we could do lessons together. He worked on speaking Hebrew. He did horseshoeing. He did cross-country skiing, blacksmithing, beekeeping, shoe shining. He made money. He told me when as a kid, he made, I think it was like a dime for shoe shining. He loved Dutch oven cooking, kayaking, hiking, backpacking, camping. He loved any type of cooking. He wasn't an official barber, but he cut a lot of people's hair. And he did knife sharpening. He was also one that for not leaving Julian, he spoke Spanish, and he was pretty proud that he could speak quite a bit of Native American. And half the time he would go out and he might see an Indian, like in Escondido, and immediately, and I can't tell you because I forget it, I have it written down, but it's hello. And he'd start speaking Native American. I'm like, Dad, I don't know if he speaks that. I don't want to get offended. But then I realized that was just Dad saying hello, right? So that was a good thing. He was a pastor for 9 years in Shelter Valley. They asked him to come down and help, and helping was 9 years. And one of my dad's biggest things that he did is he visited shut-ins, hospitals, and people in convalescent homes. He didn't want people to be alone in these areas. So he made sure that he went and did a lot of visiting. Obviously, he loved to fish, but we always joke. He did canal fishing, Oregon surf fishing, Sierras with our son Logan, fly fishing. But he was really a fisher of men because he wasn't a very good fisherman. He loved tractors, and I was brought up with all forms of tractors. So the tractors, we had the D3, and then he also got the bigger tractor, and he taught me how to drive it. And then later sold it. So then when we started farming, I remember the tractor being dropped off, and he goes, "This is a really big tractor." And he pulled up for farming. It is a big tractor. But to me, I'm going, that's a big tractor. Not compared to a Caterpillar. That's not a big tractor. And so I love tractors like my dad. And he liked to always garden. And then in his later days, he started farming. And so the first year he started farming, he planted 1,200 tomato plants. And that was the year we were down at the produce stand. And Dad, we had tomatoes. Oh my goodness. I can't even tell you how many tomatoes. And he goes, "Stacy, what are we going to do with these?" And I go, "God gave us tomatoes. I'm making tomato sauce." And that's what we did. And he goes, "Will it sell?" I go, "I don't know, but we're making tomato sauce." So that's what we did. And so he was always planting the seed. Hold on, sorry. My lips are so dry from the weather. He was always planting seeds. And that was his big deal, is it didn't matter where he went, he planted. And you have seeds on your table today to take. For my father, there's peanuts on the table. I don't know a day my dad didn't eat peanuts. And so we still do peanuts in the shell for that. There's cider in the back, and then the apples. And mostly it's pictures of the farm because my dad was really proud of the foot of Volcan. That was his favorite spot, and that's one of mine here in Julian. And the other thing is, and the last thing I would say is, he traveled. And a lot of people didn't know that even though he lived here, he went to Africa, Jordan, Colombia, Venezuela, Israel, Italy, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, France, and Mexico. Plus traveling in the United States. And so I realized, I thought, what for me, what I would want you to have from this. And when we started traveling, I was little when we were camping, but when we went to Ireland, Dad was worried I'd get lost. I was like, junior high, I guess. And it was crowded. So we were in London in the train station and things. And he was scared if we got separated. So he came up with a whistle. And we'll see if because my lips are dry. And then I would whistle back. And I think about it because it's kind of like quail. If anybody's ever told you a quail sounds like they go, "Where are you? Where are you?" And then they answer, "Here I am, here I am." Well, that was the whistle. And we did it everywhere we traveled. And that way he knew and I knew I could find my dad because I didn't want to be separated either. And we traveled a lot. Then we got where we started doing the whistle. We'd be working in the cider mill and it'd be busy. And I'm like, I need my dad. And I'd whistle and his hand would go up and he'd go, "I'm coming," or he'd whistle back. And it didn't matter, grocery stores, everything. And so these last 5 months have been really hard, but I'd go over to visit him and he couldn't get out of bed. But it was summertime and the window was open. So I'd get out of the car and I'd whistle. And then I'd go in the house and I go, "Did you hear me?" And he goes, "I thought that was you." And so that whistle was so important because I knew my father and my father knew me. And I was looking in my Bible, and when this Bible was given to me on my 13th birthday from my grandparents. And I've kept it with me. And my dad always said if he didn't get married and have kids and stay in the church, he probably would have been in a lot of trouble. And so we were very grounded here in this church until I went to college. We visited churches, and it wasn't the church itself, but just being grounded in the Lord. And so I opened up because I'm like, what would I share? And what came to me was John 10, which is about sheep and that they know their master. And in here in my Bible, I don't know when I wrote it in because I didn't put the date, but I looked and I just had to laugh. It says, "Dad and the whistle." So I got to get my glasses. "Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter by the door into the fold of the sheep, but climbs up some other way, he is a thief and a robber. But he who enters by the door is a shepherd of the sheep. To him the doorkeeper opens, and the sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he puts forth all of his own, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. And a stranger they simply will not follow, but will flee from him because they do not know the voice of strangers." And I just thought of that because as my dad planted seeds, all it took was the faith of a mustard seed. And so each seed that you have on your table is a tiny little seed. And if you don't know the Lord, all you have to have is that tiny, tiny little faith. It's nothing magical. You came in here and you sat in a chair and you never even looked to see if it was going to hold you. You had faith it was going to hold you up. So that little, tiny, tiny bit of faith, you can say, right, eyes open. You don't have to close your eyes. You don't have to do anything. Say, "Lord, I want to be part of your flock." That's what my dad did as a kid. That's what I did as a kid. And then we know where we're going because I ask when I go visit people, and I have to tell you, 3-4 of our teachers that taught us in high school have died in the last couple of years. And I went to them and I said, "Do you know where home is?" And I know that at least Mr. Welch, he said, "Well, yeah, I live on, 22 whatever." And And so I said, no, Welch, do you know where home is? And he said, yes, Stacy, I know where home is. And that made me comforted to know that he knew a Savior and he listened to his voice. Now, that might not have been all the time. I don't all the time either, right? But it does mean that we have that hope and that faith. And I really pray that for everyone here in this room, because that's what my dad would want. So thank you for coming today.
Preaching the word just like a slaughter. Nice. And it's good. Well, the next gentleman coming up here, I actually know his brother much more than I know him. I know Scott Munson well from being a teacher at the high school, my son's teacher. And I was kind of surprised to hear there was a Steve Munson that I didn't even know much about. But I understand that obviously through Fred Slaughter's camping and outdoor trips and things like that, that they made a big impression on you. And again, you have much to share as a young man and now as a grown man about how Fred Slaughter impacted your life. So welcome, Steve Munson. Come on up.
Something. Do I need it? I guess so. All right. All right. I'm sorry. Well, this was 40 pages, and Stacy said I only had a couple minutes, so I shortened it up to 2. So, I get to talk about Fred. Couple of things. Stacy didn't mention is Fred was also a mentor, and he was a Sunday school teacher for young boys. And that's where Fred really stepped into my life. They want it to be louder back there. I guess I'm not doing a very good job here. Can you hear me now? Sorry. Anyway, Fred was a mentor. As we got older, a good friend, Sunday school teacher, and she said a preacher. He used to come over to my house even, and we did evening Bible studies at my house with people. I've been in Fred's life a lot. He's been in mine a lot. When I first moved up here in 1972, one of my first memories of Fred, we just started here at the church, and we didn't know anybody here. Fred knew that we were building a home over in Pine Hills, and that's about it. I had no idea anything else about Fred. Well, my dad was wanting to pour the driveway, and I don't know if you've ever seen our driveway, but it's about 7,000 feet long and it's straight up a hill. And my dad had my older brother and myself going to pour this thing. The porter showed up with the concrete truck, and right behind him, Fred pulled in. We didn't know Fred was coming. Fred knew we were going to need help. And if you knew Fred, that's Fred. He knows you need help, he's going to show up. And that's throughout my life. That was Fred. He knew I'd need help, he'd be there for me. And I'm sure if we all sat here and told stories, we could all tell many stories about how Fred helped each and every one of us. We could be here for years talking about Fred. But fortunately, he did show up. That driveway would have really looked nasty if Fred hadn't showed up. I do concrete for a living now. I would have had about 4 finishers and 3 laborers on that pour. And we had Fred. And it came out good. So it was just so nice to have Fred show up. So that was my first acquaintance with Fred. After that, I started meeting Fred here at church. He was my Sunday school teacher. And he was also a mentor to me. When I say mentor, I'm a typical